It was her first time, and no one imagined that whisper would change everything. When she said, "Please don't stop," he surrendered completely to her charm, and what was only desire became something much bigger. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because what happened next will surprise you. Michael's hand trembled when Emily whispered those words on the dance floor, her closed eyes reflecting a surrender so pure that he, accustomed to negotiating millions without blinking, felt something inside him shatter like glass under pressure. "Please don't stop," she pleaded. And in that moment, beneath the soft lights of the charity gala ballroom at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan, the 37-year-old man, who had never allowed himself to feel anything beyond ambition, discovered he was completely lost. The Hudson River sparkled through the panoramic windows, its waters kissing the Manhattan shoreline with the same insistence that destiny knocked on the door of two worlds that should never have met. The orchestra played a soft version of a classic waltz, and the charity event guests moved through the ballroom like elegant chess pieces, each movement calculated, each smile rehearsed. But Emily didn't belong to that chessboard. She had entered that luxurious event only because her older sister Jennifer had insisted, practically dragging her into the five-star hotel. At 23, she worked as a literature teacher at a public school in the Bronx, wearing a borrowed dress that didn't hide her humble origins, her cheap shoes barely matching the environment of crystal chandeliers and French champagne. But there was something about her, a radiant authenticity that cut through the superficiality of that world like light through fog. Her brown eyes observed everything with genuine curiosity, delicately touching the orchids on the tables as if they were rare treasures. She didn't feign disinterest, didn't calculate movements. She was transparent as the water in Central Park's reservoir. And that scared Michael more than it should have. He had noticed her immediately, not because of the dress or posture, but because of the way she breathed that alien world with childlike wonder. Michael Harrison, founder and CEO of a tech company valued at hundreds of millions, had learned to read people like others read newspapers. He saw the masks, the hidden interests, the bought smiles, but she wore no mask. And that, in Michael's world, was more dangerous than any corporate strategy. When he crossed the ballroom toward her, he felt something strange in his chest, as if his lungs had temporarily forgotten how to function. Emily stood by a marble column, watching the couples dance, biting her lower lip with a mixture of fascination and shyness. "Would you like to dance?" Michael asked, extending his hand. The blush that flooded Emily's cheeks was instant and honest. Her eyes widened, and for a second he thought she would say no. But then, with a small smile that illuminated something dark within him, she placed her trembling hand in his. "I've never waltzed before," she confessed, her voice soft as worn velvet. "I've never been to a place like this." Instead of backing away, Michael felt something completely strange, the desire to teach, to guide, to share something he had mastered for years. And there, in her first awkward steps to the sound of the orchestra, he began to fall. Emily's cheap perfume, mixed with the scent of common lavender soap, was more intoxicating than any French fragrance he had ever known. Her hands, calloused from writing on blackboards, contrasted with the artificial softness of the hands of Manhattan's high society socialites. When she stumbled for the third time, laughing at herself with such lightness that the sound seemed like music, he found himself laughing too. A real laugh, not the polite laugh he used in business meetings. "Sorry," she said, biting her lip. "I'm terrible at this." "No," Michael responded, his voice softer than he intended. "You're perfect." And in that moment, surrounded by millionaires and heirs, holding a public school teacher who smelled of cheap lavender and expensive honesty, Michael Harrison understood a truth he had been avoiding his entire life. He had been building an empire on empty foundations, and now, in the arms of this woman who didn't know his name or fortune, he finally felt something solid beneath his feet. Because sometimes the greatest wealth is not what we accumulate, but what we dare to lose for something real. The following days were exquisite torture for Michael. He couldn't get her out of his head. During important meetings in his midtown office tower, his mind wandered to the sound of Emily's laughter. During business dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants in Tribeca, he remembered the way she had bitten into a canapé with genuine delight, as if it were the most exquisite delicacy in the world. He had managed to get her full name, Emily Grace Parker. No aristocratic surname, no connection to important families, just a young teacher who lived in a modest apartment in the Bronx and took 2 subway trains every morning to get to the school where she taught. Michael told himself it was just curiosity, but curiosity didn't explain why he had discreetly hired a private investigator just to confirm where she worked. Nor did it explain why, 3 days after the gala, he found himself driving his Tesla toward the neighborhood where the school was located. He saw her for the first time from a distance, surrounded by children in the small playground. She wore simple jeans and a white blouse, her hair tied in a messy ponytail. She gestured animatedly while speaking, and the children looked at her with absolute adoration. Something in Michael's chest contracted painfully. This woman, who had nothing according to his world's standards, was the richest person he had ever met. Rich in passion, in purpose, in genuine human connection. And he, with all his bank accounts and properties, suddenly felt destitute. "Mr. Harrison," his personal assistant said over the phone, pulling him from his reverie. "The meeting with the Japanese investors is in 20 minutes. Michael looked at the luxury watch on his wrist, then back at Emily, who was now crouching to comfort a small child who had fallen. The tenderness in her gestures was so natural, so instinctive. "Cancel the meeting," Michael said. "What, sir, these are investors from Tokyo who—" "Cancel it," he repeated, and hung up. For the first time in his meticulously built career, Michael chose something that made no business sense. He chose to stay another 30 minutes, watching a woman who didn't even know he was there, just to understand what exactly attracted him so much. By the end of the week, he had made a decision. He called the director of his corporate foundation and gave specific instructions. He wanted to make an anonymous and substantial donation to the school where Emily worked, but not a generic donation. He wanted a new library built, equipped with everything the children needed. "And what's the budget limit?" the director asked. Michael thought of Emily's eyes lighting up as she talked about Hemingway with the children. "There is no limit. Make it exceptional." When announcement day came, Michael parked at a safe distance, watching from inside his dark car. He saw Emily exit the building with the principal, saw the exact moment they gave her the news. He saw her hands fly to her mouth, saw the tears begin to roll down her cheeks. And then he saw something that completely paralyzed him. Emily turned to the children playing in the yard and shouted, "We're getting a new library, a real library." The children ran to her, screaming with joy, and she hugged them all, laughing and crying at the same time. In that moment, surrounded by children who loved her, celebrating something he had done, Michael felt something he had never experienced. The desire to do good, not for public image or tax deductions, but simply because it brought light to the eyes of someone who mattered. There is a type of power not taught in business schools, the power to disappear in an act of kindness, to give without expecting recognition, to build another's happiness as if it were your own. But something within him knew he couldn't stay in the shadows forever. The need to be close to Emily, to really know her, had become almost physical. So he began to orchestrate chance encounters. The small coffee shop in Greenwich Village where she drank her morning latte became his new temporary office. The modest used bookstore in the East Village that she visited on Saturdays became his new favorite place. The first time they really talked after the gala was at that coffee shop. Michael had arrived early, strategically positioning himself at a table near the counter. When Emily entered, her eyes recognized him immediately. "The man from the waltz?" she said, surprised but smiling. "Michael," he replied, standing up. "And you're Emily." "How?" "I have a good memory for people who step on my feet," he joked, and she blushed delightfully. What began as a 15-minute coffee turned into 2 hours. They talked about everything and nothing, about New York, about literature, about the difference between living and existing. Emily spoke about Hemingway and Fitzgerald with the same intensity others spoke about stock portfolios. Her eyes sparkled when discussing how American literature could transform lives. Michael, accustomed to controlling conversations, found himself simply listening, and it was glorious. "And you?" she finally asked. "What do you do?" "Technology," he replied, intentionally vague. "Software development." It wasn't a lie, but it also wasn't the whole truth. He didn't mention he was the CEO, nor the millions, nor the influence. For the first time in years, he wanted to be known simply as Michael, not as Michael Harrison of Harrison Tech. Over the following weeks, The chance encounters became more frequent. Michael managed to be where Emily would be, always with plausible excuses. He'd heard that coffee shop had the best espresso in Manhattan. He'd been looking for precisely that Steinbeck book she had just bought. Emily, naturally perceptive, began to suspect. One rainy October afternoon, while they shared a bench under a cafe awning in the West Village, she gently confronted him. "Michael," she said, looking directly into his eyes, "why do I feel like these encounters aren't as random as you pretend?" His heart raced. He could have lied, could have deflected the conversation with the skill of an experienced negotiator, but looking into those honest brown eyes, he couldn't. "Because they're not," he admitted. "Not since the second encounter. I've been looking for reasons to see you." He expected rejection, perhaps discomfort. Instead, Emily smiled softly, a smile that contained something of sadness. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of rain against the awning. "Because—" Michael searched for the right words, something that had never been difficult for him until now. "Because when I'm with you, I feel like I'm finally awake. As if I've been sleepwalking for 37 years. Emily looked away, her fingers nervously playing with her teacup handle. "You don't really know me, Michael. You don't know anything about me, about my life, about—" "Then let me know you," he interrupted, leaning forward. "Have dinner with me. A real dinner, not a chance encounter. Let me know the woman who makes 7-year-olds excited about To Kill a Mockingbird." There was a long pause. The rain continued to fall, and the world seemed to reduce to that small protected space where two people from completely different worlds decided whether it was worth building a bridge. "Okay," Emily finally said, "but not somewhere fancy. Somewhere normal." Michael smiled. "I know the perfect place." He took her to a small Italian trattoria in the heart of the Bronx, not far from where she lived. The place smelled of homemade marinara sauce and years of stories shared over worn wooden tables. The waiters knew everyone by name, and the food was simple but perfect. Emily relaxed immediately. This was her world, and Michael realized she shone brighter here than in any Plaza Hotel ballroom. It was during that dinner that she began to really open up. She told about her father, who had abandoned the family when she was 6, leaving her mother alone with 4 children in a small 2-bedroom apartment. She spoke about how she had learned to find wealth in books, because they were the only thing she could possess for free through the public library. "Every book was like a door to another world," she explained, her eyes lost in memories. "When we didn't have money for heating, I read about warm places. When my mother cried in the kitchen because she didn't know how to pay rent, I lost myself in stories with happy endings. And now you teach," Michael said softly. "You give other children those same doors." Emily nodded, and for the first time since they began talking about her past, a tear rolled down her cheek. "Every student I help is like rewriting my own story, like telling that scared girl I was, 'Look, yes, there is a way out. Education is the way out.'" Michael extended his hand across the table, taking hers. Her hand was small and warm in his, and he felt something expand in his chest, something enormous and terrifying. "You're extraordinary," he said, and he meant it completely. Emily looked at him, her eyes still moist. "I'm not extraordinary. I'm just someone who knows pain and doesn't want others to feel it. True greatness is not in never having fallen, but in remembering how it feels to be on the ground and extending your hand to those who are falling." That night, Michael drove her home in his Tesla. Emily hadn't asked about the car before, but now, seeing the obvious luxury of the vehicle, her expression changed subtly. "Software development?" she asked with an ironic smile. "Must pay well." "It does," Michael admitted, "probably more than it should." When they arrived in front of Emily's modest building, she didn't immediately exit the car. She sat there, looking through the window at her worn building, with laundry hanging on balconies and paint peeling from walls. "Our worlds are very different, Michael," she finally said, her voice calm but serious. "I don't know if—" "I don't care about our worlds," he interrupted. "I care about you." Emily turned to him, and there was something in her eyes, a mixture of hope and fear. "What if the real person isn't what you expect? What if I'm just a poor girl with dreams of changing the world one child at a time?" Michael leaned toward her so close he could count every eyelash. "Then you'll be exactly what I expect. Because that's what I saw from the first moment." And there, in the car parked in front of a building in the Bronx, so far from ballrooms and corporate towers of his normal life, Michael Harrison kissed Emily Grace Parker for the first time. It was a soft kiss, almost shy, a kiss that didn't promise unbridled passion but something much more dangerous, future promises, true change, the possibility of becoming someone completely different. When they separated, Emily touched her own lips with trembling fingers. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too," Michael responded, and it was the most honest truth he had said in years. The first crack appeared a month later, in the most unexpected way. Michael had invited Emily to his penthouse apartment in Tribeca for the first time. He was nervous, like a teenager, making sure everything was perfect: appropriate wine, soft music, impressive sunset view over the Hudson. But when Emily entered and saw the space, her reaction wasn't what he expected. There was no awe in her eyes, but something more complex, a mixture of recognition and something like disappointment. She walked slowly through the minimalist design apartment, touching cold marble surfaces, looking at contemporary art pieces that cost more than her mother earned in 5 years. And then she reached the bookshelf. It was a masterpiece of Italian carpentry, elegantly curving against the wall, filled with first editions and expensive volumes of American authors: Hemingway, Steinbeck, Fitzgerald, Faulkner. Each book perfectly aligned, without a speck of dust. Emily pulled out one at random, The Great Gatsby. She opened the pages carefully, and Michael saw the exact moment she noticed the book had never been read. The pages were too stiff, the spine too perfect. She checked another and another. "They're just objects to you," she finally said, her voice soft but laden with disappointment. There was no accusation in her tone, only sadness. "Beautiful, expensive objects that you've never read." Michael felt something icy in his stomach. "They're decoration," he began to explain, but the words sounded empty even to him. "The designer said that—" "A designer chose your books," Emily interrupted, gently closing the volume and returning it to its place. She turned to him, and there were tears in her eyes. "You know what's saddest? Each of these books contains entire worlds, broken and mended hearts, complete lives of characters who learn and grow, and you bought them by the foot to fill spaces on a wall." "Emily, No," she raised a hand. "I'm not angry. I'm just sad, because I thought maybe you understood." That beneath all this, she made a wide gesture encompassing the luxurious apartment, there was someone who truly valued the things that matter. Michael was silent. For the first time in decades, he felt genuinely ashamed, not of his wealth, but of his emptiness, of how he had filled his life with things instead of meaning. "You're right," he finally said, his voice broken. "I haven't read them. The truth is, I barely read anything that isn't financial reports or market projections. And you're right that it's sad." Emily approached him, her expression softening. "Can I ask you something? When was the last time you did something just because it made you happy? Not because it was good for business, not because it would impress someone. Just because it was something you really wanted to do?" Michael thought for a long time. Years passed through his mind. Meetings, acquisitions, negotiations, strategies. He couldn't remember a single moment of pure, uncalculated joy. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe when I was 8 and building sandcastles at Cape Cod with my grandfather." Emily's eyes softened. "Then you've been asleep for a very long time, Michael Harrison." That night was a turning point. Instead of the elegant dinner he had planned, they sat on the apartment floor, and Emily began reading to him from one of the unread books, The Grapes of Wrath, by Steinbeck. Her voice was melodious, bringing to life words that had been dead on that shelf for years. Michael listened, really listened, feeling something awaken within him. It wasn't just about the book, but about allowing himself to be educated, guided, transformed by someone else. When she finished the first chapter, he had tears in his eyes. "I had no idea," he whispered. "I had no idea what I was missing." Emily smiled, but there was sadness in that smile. "There's so much more to see, Michael, so much more to feel. But you have to be willing to come down from that tower you've built." "What if I don't know how?" he asked, vulnerable in a way he had never allowed himself to be. "Then I'll teach you," she replied, taking his hand. "Step by step, book by book, moment by moment." But the next day everything changed. An administrative staff member at the school casually mentioned Michael Harrison's name in a conversation with Emily. They were talking about the new library, about the mysterious donor, and the woman, not knowing the connection, said, "Imagine it was Michael Harrison from Harrison Tech. You know that building in Midtown? His company is there. They say it's worth hundreds of millions." Emily froze. The pieces began to fit together. The Tesla, the Tribeca apartment, the expensive books never read, the way waiters in restaurants treated him with special deference. But above all, the library. The library that had changed her school, that had brought so much joy. It had been him. He hadn't told her. That afternoon, Emily appeared at the reception of the Midtown Tower, her eyes red but her jaw firm. The receptionist tried to stop her, but she simply said, "Tell Michael Harrison that Emily Parker is here. He'll see me." And he did. Michael came out of an important meeting, his face paling when he saw her. "Emily, Did you buy me?" she asked, her voice breaking but strong. "Did you think you could buy my world, my joys, my gratitude?" "It wasn't like that." Michael tried to approach, but she backed away. "It was because I wanted to help, because I saw how much it meant to you, and you didn't think to tell me." Tears now flowed freely. "You didn't think I deserved to know. Every time I told you about the library, every time I told you how happy the children were, and you just smiled, knowing you had orchestrated everything. I wanted it to be anonymous," Michael said desperately. "I didn't want you to think I was trying to impress you or—" "But you were deceiving me," Emily shouted, and several heads turned in the elegant reception. She lowered her voice, but the intensity remained. "You made me believe we were building something real, something honest. But all along you knew things about my life that I didn't know about yours. How can I trust you now?" Michael had no answer, because she was right. It had been manipulation, even with the best intentions. He had used his power and wealth to infiltrate her world, to make himself necessary, to create an emotional debt she had never asked for. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words sounded so inadequate. "Emily, I'm so sorry, you're right. I should have told you. I should have—" "Goodbye, Michael," she interrupted, her voice now cold. "Thank you for the library. The children love it. But I can't be with someone who doesn't trust me enough to be honest." And she left. The sound of the door closing behind her was like a final verdict in a courtroom. Michael stood there in the middle of his own company's reception, feeling that everything he had built, not just with Emily but with himself, was crumbling. Because the hardest truth is this: you can have all the right intentions and still hurt someone. And sometimes the deepest damage comes not from malice, but from believing you know what's best for another. The weeks that followed were silent hell for Michael. He plunged into work with an intensity that alarmed even his most dedicated employees. He arrived at the office before dawn and left long after midnight. He closed a $20 million deal with German investors and felt nothing. He appeared on the cover of a business magazine as America's tech titan and threw the magazine in the trash without reading it. Nothing mattered. His assistant, Sarah, who had worked with him for 7 years, finally confronted him one afternoon when she found him staring blankly at his computer screen. "Mr. Harrison," she said firmly, "you need to talk to someone. A professional, maybe. This isn't healthy." "I'm fine," Michael replied automatically. "No, you're not." Sarah closed his office door, something she had never done. "I've worked for you for 7 years. I've seen you close impossible deals without breaking a sweat. I've seen you fire 50 people without blinking, but I've never seen you like this, empty." Michael looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. Sarah was 43, had 2 kids, and had dedicated a decade of her life to making his calendar work, and he barely knew anything about her. "How do you do it?" he asked suddenly. "How do you balance everything? Work, your family, finding meaning in the small things?" Sarah sat down, surprised by the question. "Because I know why I work. I work so my kids can go to college, so my family has security. Every hour here has a purpose outside these walls." "And if your purpose leaves?" Michael asked, his voice barely audible. "If you lose her?" "Then," Sarah leaned forward, "you find a way to get her back, or you find a new purpose. But you don't give up and bury yourself alive in this tower." Those words resonated in Michael for days. Meanwhile, Emily was also struggling. Her students noticed that Miss Parker didn't smile as much. Her explanations about Harper Lee were mechanical instead of passionate, and at night, in her small apartment, She found herself thinking about Michael more than she wanted to admit. She hated that he had deceived her, but she also remembered how he had looked at her, as if she were something precious and rare. She remembered his vulnerability when he admitted he hadn't done anything for pure joy in decades. She remembered the kiss, soft and full of unspoken promises. "You're a fool," she told herself, staring at her bedroom ceiling. "You let him in, and he played you." But another voice, softer, whispered, "What if he wasn't playing? What if he simply didn't know how to love without using the only tools he knows?" It was Marcus, one of her shyest students, who changed everything. The 8-year-old boy was writing an essay for class about invisible heroes. When Emily read it, her hands began to tremble. Marcus wrote, "My invisible hero is the person who gave our school a library. I don't know who they are, but every time I check out a book I think about them. But my real hero is Miss Parker, because she taught us to love the books in that library. Without her, the library would just be a room with books. With her, it's a room full of adventures." Emily's tears fell on the paper, staining the ink. In her pain and anger, she had forgotten something fundamental. Michael hadn't created the library to buy her. He had created it because he saw her passion and wanted to amplify it. Without her teaching, without her love for literature, the library would have been just that, books on shelves. He hadn't replaced her. He had honored her. That night it was raining heavily over New York, the kind of rain that cleanses the city and makes everything smell new. Emily put on her simplest coat and headed to Tribeca, taking 2 subway trains, arriving soaked at Michael's building door. The doorman, recognizing her from her previous visit, let her pass. When Michael opened his apartment door and saw her there with hair plastered to her face, shivering not just from cold, he thought he was dreaming. "Emily," he breathed. "I need to know," she said, her voice firm despite the trembling. "Did you do it for me or for the children?" Michael looked into her eyes, and this time there was no room for half-truths or well-intentioned manipulations. Only room for the brutal honesty she deserved. "First for you," he admitted, "because I was desperate to be part of your world in any way I could. But when I saw their joy, when I saw what it meant to them, it became something bigger than my selfish desires. I promised that what started as a way to get close to you turned into something real." Emily nodded slowly, processing his words. "And everything else? The chance encounters, hiding in the shadows? All real," Michael said. "Clumsily executed, selfishly motivated at first, but the feelings were real. Everything I felt, everything I feel, is real." There was a long silence. Rain beat against the penthouse windows, and New York sparkled under the nightlights, indifferent to 2 hearts trying to find their way back to each other. "You scared me," Emily finally said, "because I saw the power you have, the power to change my world with 1 phone call, and I realized how vulnerable I am to that." "I know," Michael replied, "and you're right to be afraid, because I'm scared too. Scared that my money is the only thing I can offer, scared that I'm not enough without it." Emily approached him, and he could see the conflict in her eyes, the war between the desire to forgive and the fear of being hurt again. "Teach me," she finally said. "Teach me not to be afraid of your power, and I'll teach you not to be afraid of your vulnerability." And there, in that apartment that had been a symbol of everything that separated them, they began again. Emily asked him to read to her, something no one had ever done in her life. Michael chose a volume of Robert Frost poetry from the decorative shelf. His hands trembled as he opened it. His voice stumbled over the words at first. But then he gained confidence. And as he read verses from The Road Not Taken about love and loss and redemption, Emily closed her eyes and simply listened. "Please don't stop," she whispered when he paused. And he didn't stop. He read until his voice became hoarse, until the rain stopped falling, until dawn began to paint itself over the Hudson River. And when he finally closed the book, Emily opened her eyes and looked at him with something that was part forgiveness, part hope, and completely love. Because true intimacy is not just sharing your strength, but trusting someone with your weakness. And sometimes the bravest act is allowing yourself to be cared for. 3 weeks later, Michael proposed to Emily something that terrified him more than any negotiation: meeting his family. His mother, Catherine Harrison Montgomery, was an old-school matriarch. She lived in a mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, surrounded by portraits of ancestors and furniture that had passed through generations. Her name, though not noble, had earned respect in Connecticut high society circles through decades of wealth and strategic marriages. For Catherine, the idea of her only son dating a public school teacher with no recognizable surname was unthinkable. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked as they traveled on the Metro North train to Connecticut. Her hand nervously played with the hem of her dress, a new one that Michael had insisted on buying after she protested, but finally accepted as a compromise. "My mother can be difficult," Michael admitted, "but she needs to meet you. She needs to see what I see." "And what do you see?" Emily asked, turning to him. Michael took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I see someone who makes me want to be better. I see someone who found wealth where I only saw poverty. I see the woman I want to build something real with." The car drove through Connecticut's affluent neighborhoods, and Emily looked out the window, processing his words. "What if she never accepts me?" "Then it will be her loss," Michael said firmly. "But I need her to try. I need her to see that this is serious." Catherine's mansion was exactly what Emily feared, imposing, full of history and tradition, each object screaming centuries of privilege. A butler opened the door, and they were guided to a sitting room where Catherine waited, impeccable in a Chanel suit, her silver hair perfectly styled. "Mother," Michael said, kissing her cheek, "this is Emily Grace Parker." Catherine's eyes swept over Emily from head to toe, in an assessment that lasted only 2 seconds but felt like an eternity. "Charmed," she said, her tone as cold as the marble beneath her feet. Dinner was refined torture. Catherine asked questions that sounded innocent, but were designed to point out differences. "And your family, dear? Are they also in education?" Knowing they weren't. "Did you visit the Met as a child?" Knowing they couldn't afford it. "Do you speak French or Italian besides English?" Knowing the answer. Emily answered with grace, not apologizing for her origins, but also not provoking. It was a delicate dance, and Michael could see the tension in every line of her body. But the real attack came during dessert. "Michael," Catherine said, completely ignoring Emily, "Rebecca Vanderbilt called last week. Her family is interested in discussing a business merger. It would be advantageous to meet with her, don't you think?" Rebecca Vanderbilt, his ex-fiancée from 5 years ago, daughter of a Connecticut banking family with as much money as the Harrisons. Someone from his world. "Mother?" Michael set down his fork carefully, his voice controlled. "That's not going to happen." "Why not? It's just business, dear." "Because I'm not interested in Rebecca. I wasn't then, and I'm definitely not now." Catherine finally looked at Emily. "No offense, dear, but surely you understand these things are more complicated than they seem. Michael has responsibilities to his name, to his legacy. He can't simply follow his whims." The silence that followed was thick. Emily went pale, her knuckles white where she held her napkin. Michael was about to explode, but then Emily spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Mrs. Harrison Montgomery," she said, "you're right. I don't come from the same world as you. My father abandoned us when we were children. My mother cleaned houses to feed us. I learned to read with borrowed books from the library because we couldn't buy them." Catherine raised an eyebrow, apparently satisfied that Emily was admitting her inferiority. But Emily wasn't finished. "But I also learned," she continued, "that a person's true legacy isn't in their surname or bank account. It's in the lives they touch, the love they give, the difference they make. Michael told me you come from a family of merchants who built their wealth from nothing 3 generations ago. That means someone in your history also started with nothing. Or is that part of the legacy less important?" Catherine's face hardened. Michael held his breath. "Michael is not a whim to me," Emily said, looking directly into Catherine's eyes. "And I'm not a whim to him. If you can't accept that, I'm sorry. But I won't apologize for loving your son, nor should he apologize for loving me." She rose from the table with grace. "Thank you for dinner. It was enlightening." Michael immediately stood up. "Let's go, Emily." "Michael, if you walk out that door," Catherine began. "Then I'll walk out," he interrupted, taking Emily's hand, "and it will be your decision whether you see me again." They left the mansion into the Connecticut night. Emily was shaking, not from cold but from adrenaline and emotion. They had walked 2 blocks before she stopped and turned to him. "Your mother hates me," she said. "It doesn't matter," Michael replied. What matters is what you said in there. You were right. About everything. Emily shook her head. But she's your family, Michael. I can't ask you to choose between... You're not asking, he interrupted, taking her face in his hands. I'm choosing. I choose you. Again and again, I would choose you. In that moment, on a quiet Connecticut street, far from the mansion and its expectations, Michael knew he had crossed a point of no return. It wasn't just about being with Emily. It was about who he wanted to be, and he wanted to be the man she saw in him. Because true courage is not never being afraid of disappointing others. It's choosing to live with integrity, even when that choice hurts. The confrontation with his mother marked the beginning of what would be the hardest test of their relationship. Michael's company began facing serious problems. A major investment in tech startups, something that had seemed secure months ago, began to crumble. One of his key partners was discovered in a fraud scandal, dragging the reputation of all associated investors. Within weeks, Michael saw his valuation plummet. The business media that had celebrated him as America's tech titan now speculated about his imminent fall. The same people who had fawned over him at events began to avoid him. Calls went unreturned. Meetings were cancelled. New York's business ecosystem, seemingly so sophisticated, proved to be as shallow as he had always suspected. Michael worked 18 hours a day trying to save what he could. His face became gaunt. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. He lost weight. He stopped shaving regularly. And through all of it, Emily was there. Not with empty words of encouragement he would have dismissed, not pretending to understand business when she didn't, but with solid, unwavering presence. She showed up at his apartment with homemade apple pie, reminding him he needed to eat. She read to him when he was too stressed to sleep, her voice an anchor amid the chaos. She sat in silence while he worked, her mere existence a reminder that there were things more important than numbers on a screen. One night, when Michael finally broke down, when years of armor fell away, and he cried for the first time since he was 8 years old, it was in Emily's arms that he did it. "I've failed," he sobbed, the words torn from somewhere deep. "Everything I built, everything I worked for, it's falling apart." Emily held him, her fingers stroking his hair. "You haven't failed," she said softly. "You've stumbled, there's a difference." "You don't understand," Michael pulled away, his face devastated. "This was me. This company, this success was all I was." "No." Emily took his face, forcing him to look at her. "This was what you did, not who you were. Who are you, Michael? Without the company, without the money, without the title. Who are you?" He had no answer. And that realization was more terrifying than any financial loss. Emily stayed with him that night, holding him as he trembled with fears he had been repressing for decades. Fear of irrelevance, fear of not being enough, fear that without his achievements, he was nothing. "You are enough," she whispered in the darkness. "You always were enough." The following days brought impossible decisions. Michael had to lay off a third of his staff. He had to sell assets. He had to humble himself before bankers who once begged for his business. Each decision was a small death. Each meeting eroded a bit more of his sense of self. But something strange was also happening. Without the glow of extraordinary success, he began to see who was really in his corner. Sarah, his assistant, offered to take a salary cut to stay. Two of his lead engineers turned down offers from competitors. An old investor, who had nothing to gain, called just to see how he was doing. And Emily. Every day, Emily. She had never been with him for the money. But now, seeing her care for him in his lowest moment, Michael truly understood what he had found. Not a partner for his victories, but a partner for his complete humanity, including the broken parts. The real test came when Rebecca Vanderbilt reappeared. She showed up at his office without an appointment, perfectly dressed, her expensive perfume filling the space. She brought a business proposal, perfectly structured, that would completely save his company. Her family was willing to invest, to partner, to use their connections to restore his reputation. It was the perfect solution. "Michael," Rebecca said, sitting down with the confidence of someone who knows they hold the cards, "we can make this work. We can get you back on top." He read the proposal. It was generous, almost too generous, and then he understood the unwritten price. "What do you want, Rebecca?" he asked directly. She smiled, a smile that once seemed charming to him. I want what we should have had 5 years ago. We're perfect together, Michael. We always were. You knew it then, and you know it now. I'm with Emily, he said firmly. The teacher. Rebecca couldn't hide her disdain. I'm sure she's sweet. A charming adventure. But do you really think she understands your world? When this is all over, when you've rebuilt, are you going to want someone who can't tell a Picasso from a Pollock? Michael felt burning rage rise in his chest. Emily is worth more than— I'm not saying she doesn't have value, Rebecca interrupted smoothly. I'm just saying she's not your equal. I am. I understand your world because it's my world too. We can build together, Michael. A real empire. She left the contract on the desk and stood up. Think about it. The offer is on the table, but it won't last forever. When she left, Michael stared at the contract. All he had to do was sign. And maybe leave a door slightly ajar. Rebecca wasn't asking for immediate commitment. Just possibility. That evening, he arrived at Emily's apartment with the contract in his briefcase. She saw it immediately on his face, the weight of a decision. What happened? She asked, her heart already racing. Michael pulled out the contract, explained everything. The offer, the salvation, the implied price. He saw fear flood her eyes, saw her fingers tremble. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice surprisingly calm. Michael looked at her, this woman who had stayed by his side when everyone else walked away. This woman who had seen him cry, who had held him in his lowest moment, who had never asked him to be anything more than human. He walked to the sink in the small kitchen, lit a match and burned the contract. The flames consumed the paper, ashes falling like black snow. Emily gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Michael, that was a trap, he interrupted, turning to her. Not for my career, but for my soul, and I'm not going to sell it, not again. He knelt before her, taking her hands. I'm going to rebuild, the right way, with you, even if it takes years, even if I never get back to what I was. Because I've learned something, Emily. I'd rather build something small and real with you than a false empire with anyone else. Tears rolled down Emily's cheeks. Are you sure? Because I don't want you to blame me in 10 years for— I won't, he said with certainty. Because in 10 years, I'm going to look at you and thank you for having the courage to show me what really matters. In that moment, in that modest kitchen with ashes still floating in the air, Emily completely understood who Michael had become. Not the armored man she had met at the plaza, but someone who had learned that true strength wasn't never falling, but choosing to fall beside the right person. Because crises don't build character, they reveal it. And in the fire of adversity, we finally discover who we are when the masks burn away. The following 2 months were of quiet rebuilding. Michael had to accept a reality he had never imagined. He was no longer the tech industry titan. He was just another entrepreneur struggling, trying to keep alive what remained of his company. But something extraordinary was happening in that process. For the first time in his adult life, Michael was building something with his own hands, not just his money. Emily had challenged him to think beyond corporate solutions, to consider what really mattered. Together, they conceived an idea, used the remains of his company to create something with real social impact. Not top-down charity, but genuine partnerships with communities. They started small. Digital literacy workshops in Emily's neighborhood, taught by Michael's engineers who had decided to stay. Mentorship programs where experienced executives worked with young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Michael found himself teaching for the first time in his life basic financial literacy classes in Bronx community centers. At first he was terrible, too technical, using jargon no one understood. But Emily coached him, teaching him to connect, to simplify without condescending. One afternoon, an older man in one of his classes raised his hand and said, "Thank you. My son asked me about investments and I didn't know what to tell him. Now I can help." It was such a small thing, but Michael felt a wave of satisfaction that no multi-million-dollar deal had ever given him. "Did you see that?" Emily whispered afterward. "You just changed the relationship between that man and his son. That's worth more than any corporate tower." Michael began to understand what she had always known. True value isn't measured in dollars, but in human connections, in concrete differences in individual lives. Their relationship also deepened in ways he hadn't anticipated. One night, After a particularly difficult day where he had to negotiate a humiliating loan with onerous terms, Michael arrived at Emily's apartment completely defeated. She said nothing. She simply led him to her small bathroom, filled the old tub with warm water, and washed his hair with her own hands, her fingers gently massaging his scalp while his silent tears mixed with the water. "I've got you," she whispered. "I'll always have you." Another time, when Emily had a terrible day at school, a problematic child had been aggressive and she came home questioning whether she was really making any difference, Michael used what he had learned from her. He read to her from her favorite book of Emily Dickinson poetry, his voice now confident with the verses. He cooked for her, clumsily but with love, the apple pie she had taught him to make, and he was simply present. "I'm terrible at this," he said, looking at the slightly burnt pie. Emily laughed, the sound dispelling the darkness of her day. "It's perfect because you made it." But the biggest test was still to come. Catherine appeared without warning at Emily's Bronx apartment one rainy November afternoon. Emily opened the door, the smell of homemade cookies filling the air, and found the woman who had rejected her so coldly months ago. Her first instinct was to close the door. But there was something different about Catherine. Her shoulders weren't so rigid. Her eyes, typically hard, seemed tired. "Mrs. Harrison Montgomery," Emily said cautiously. "Can I help you?" "May I come in?" Catherine asked, and there was an almost humble quality in her voice that Emily had never heard before. Emily stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Catherine looked around the modest apartment, her eyes stopping on photos on the refrigerator, books stacked on every available surface, cheap but clean curtains. "Coffee," Emily offered. "Please." They sat at the small kitchen table, an uncomfortable silence between them. Finally, Catherine spoke. "My son smiles now," she said simply. "In 37 years I never saw him really smile. Oh, he smiled in photos, smiled at business meetings, but never with his eyes, never with his heart." Emily remained silent, not knowing what to say. "When I saw him last week," Catherine continued, "he had lost weight, looked tired. The company is struggling. He should be devastated. But there was a light in him I'd never seen before." She took a sip of her coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "I asked what had changed, and you know what he told me. He said, 'I finally know why I'm alive, Mother, and it's not to build empires.'" Catherine's eyes met Emily's. "You did that. You did something that all my money, all my education, all my connections couldn't do. You gave him a reason to live beyond winning." Emily felt tears sting her eyes. "Mrs. Harrison Montgomery." "Catherine," the older woman interrupted. "Please call me Catherine." "Catherine," Emily began again, "I didn't change him. I just helped him find what was already there. Your son was always capable of love, of connection. He just needed permission to be it." Catherine nodded slowly. "I came here to apologize for how I treated you, for the things I said. I was wrong." She stood to leave, but stopped at the door. "And I came to say one more thing. If you ever hurt my son, if you ever use him, I'll have to answer. But I don't think you will. I think you're the best thing that's happened to him." After Catherine left, Emily sat alone in her kitchen, processing what had just happened. When Michael arrived that evening, she told him everything. He hugged her tightly. "My mother never apologizes, never. She loves you," Emily said simply. "In her way, she always has. She just didn't know how to show it." Michael kissed her forehead. "You know what's craziest about all this? 6 months ago, if I'd lost my mother's approval, I would have been devastated. Now I care, but it doesn't define me. I don't need her validation anymore." "What do you need?" Emily asked. "You," he replied simply. "Just you. Because growing up isn't accumulating more, but learning to need less. And true maturity is when one person's love becomes more important than everyone else's approval." December arrived with its particular magic to New York. Christmas lights lit up Fifth Avenue, and the air smelled of roasted chestnuts and hot chocolate. Michael had been planning something in secret for weeks. Not something big or expensive in the style of the man he had been. Something different. Something that showed who he had become. One afternoon he asked Emily to meet him at the school after classes. When she arrived, she found the lights off in her classroom. "Michael," she called, entering cautiously. The lights turned on, revealing her classroom transformed, but not with expensive decorations or cutting-edge technology. It was filled with her students and their families, all smiling. In the center of the room was a large table covered with books, but not new books. These were used books, each carefully selected, each with a handwritten note by Michael, explaining why that particular book mattered. What? Emily couldn't finish the sentence. Michael approached her. I spent the last 2 months visiting every used bookstore in New York. I read each of these books, some for the first time, others rereading with new eyes, and I wrote notes for your students, personalized recommendations based on what you told me about each of them. Emily picked up one of the books. It was a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are. The note said, "For Marcus, who loves asking questions and living adventures. This book will show you that being curious is a superpower." From Michael, a lifelong student who's still learning to really read. Tears flowed freely down Emily's face. She walked around the table, seeing book after book, each chosen with care, each note written with genuine thought. "You read all of these?" 53 books in 2 months, Michael said, smiling. "My personal record. And you know what? Each one taught me something. But the most important book is the one I'm still reading, the book of how to be human, and you're the teacher." Marcus, the shy boy who had written about invisible heroes, timidly approached. "Mr. Michael, did you really read all these books?" Michael knelt to his level. "Every word, Marcus, and you know what I discovered? That your teacher was right all along. Books aren't just words on pages, they're doors to entire worlds. And I'm sorry it took me so long to find the key." The parents began to approach, some recognizing Michael from the media, others simply seeing a man who had done something beautiful for their children. A mother, Mrs. Rodriguez, who cleaned offices at night and barely spoke English, approached Emily with tears in her eyes. "My son Jorge, he says Mr. Michael wrote about a book about a poor boy who becomes someone great. He says maybe he can be great too." Emily hugged the woman, both crying now, and Michael, seeing this, felt something expand in his chest. This was success. Not numbers in a bank account, but hope planted in young hearts. But the real gift came later, when everyone had left, and only the two of them remained in the classroom, lit only by Christmas lights from the street. "Thank you," Emily said, her voice broken with emotion. "This is—" "I have no words." "I have words," Michael said, taking her hands. "Words I've been practicing for weeks because I've never said anything like this before, and I want to get it right." He knelt. He didn't have an elegant ring, just a simple silver band that had belonged to his grandfather, the only family member who had loved him unconditionally. "Emily Grace Parker," he began, his voice slightly trembling. "7 months ago I walked into a ballroom and saw a woman who shone like no one I'd ever met. She didn't shine with diamonds or expensive dresses. She shone with something I'd forgotten existed. Genuine joy, kindness without calculation, love without conditions." Emily had her hands over her mouth, tears already flowing. "You taught me that being vulnerable isn't weakness. You taught me that giving without expecting anything in return is the highest form of power. You taught me that a used book with notes in the margins is worth more than an untouched first edition. You taught me to live." He opened the small box, revealing the simple ring. "I can't promise you mansions or private jet travel. I can't promise I'll rebuild my empire. But I can promise this. Every day, I'll choose to be the man I see reflected in your eyes. Every day I'll work to deserve you. And every day I'll love you with every cell of my being. Will you marry me?" The silence seemed to stretch forever. Michael could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the sweat on his palms. For the first time in his life, he had no backup plan, no safety net. He was completely vulnerable. "Yes," Emily whispered. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." She threw herself into his arms with such force that they both nearly fell. They laughed and cried simultaneously, their bodies intertwined in the middle of a classroom full of books they now both shared as treasures. When they finally separated, Michael slid the ring onto her finger. It was simple, a bit worn, perfectly imperfect. "It belonged to my grandfather," Michael explained. "He was a teacher. Never had much money, but he was the richest man I knew. He taught me to build sandcastles in Cape Cod, taught me that the best things in life are the ones you build with your own hands." "It's perfect," Emily said, looking at the ring as if it were the world's largest diamond. That night, they walked through Rockefeller Center holding hands, just another couple in love among the holiday crowds. No one recognized them. No one looked twice. And it was exactly perfect. "What are you thinking?" Emily asked, watching a street musician play Christmas carols. "I'm thinking," Michael said, "that a year ago I would have been at a corporate dinner pretending interest in empty conversations. And now I'm here, engaged to the most extraordinary woman in the world, and I wouldn't trade a single moment of this difficult year." Emily rested her head on his shoulder. "Not even the parts where you almost lost everything." "Especially those parts," he replied. "Because it was by losing everything that I found the only thing that really matters. Because sometimes we need to lose everything we thought defined us to discover who we really are. And in that nakedness, in that absolute vulnerability, we can finally be loved not for what we have, but for what we are." But happiness rarely comes without tests. 2 weeks after the proposal, Michael's past returned in the most unexpected form. He was in a meeting with potential investors, small compared to the deals he used to make, but crucial for keeping his company afloat. The presentation was going well when the door opened and Rebecca Vanderbilt walked in. "Sorry for the interruption," she said with her perfect smile, "but I think I can offer valuable perspective on this investment opportunity." Michael felt his stomach drop. "Rebecca, this is a private meeting." "My family decided to consider the investment after all," she interrupted, taking a seat as if it belonged to her. "Michael, why don't you tell these gentlemen about our previous proposal?" What followed was calculated humiliation. Rebecca revealed, with documents to back her up, that the previous offer had been on the table until Michael rejected it for personal reasons. She painted a picture of a man letting emotions dictate business decisions, of someone who was no longer trustworthy as a business partner. The investors left without committing to anything. When the room emptied, only Michael and Rebecca remained. "Why did you do that?" Michael asked, his voice controlled but furious. "Because you needed a reminder," Rebecca replied coldly, "that playing charity with your little teacher girlfriend has consequences. The real world, Michael, doesn't run on fairy tales." "Is this revenge? Because I rejected you?" "This is business," Rebecca said, picking up her designer handbag, "and a lesson that you can't have both. Either you play in this league with people who understand the rules, or you go down to your little teacher's level. But don't pretend you can have her high moral world and yours too." She left, leaving Michael trembling with rage and something darker: doubt. That evening, he didn't go to Emily's apartment. He went to a bar in the Lower East Side, something he hadn't done since college days, and drank whiskey alone in a dark corner. His phone vibrated constantly with messages from Emily. He ignored them all. Was Rebecca right? Was it naive to think he could rebuild in the corporate world while living by Emily's principles? Was he dooming his company with his new morality? It was Sarah who finally found him, using the shared phone location they kept for emergencies. "Mr. Harrison," she said, sitting across from him without asking permission, "what the hell do you think you're doing?" "Drinking," he replied. "Isn't it obvious? Emily is worried. She called me when you didn't answer." Michael took another sip. "Maybe I shouldn't be with her. Maybe Rebecca's right and I'm a sentimental fool." Sarah, who rarely lost her composure, slammed the table hard. "Listen to me carefully. I've worked for powerful men for 20 years. I've seen everything: egos, workaholism, casual cruelty. And you know what? Most of them are miserable. Rich, but miserable." She leaned forward. "For the first time since I've known you, you seem happy. Tired, struggling, but genuinely happy. And you want to throw it all away because a bitter woman made you feel bad?" "It's not just Rebecca," Michael said. "It's that maybe she's right. Maybe I can't have both." "Then don't have both," Sarah replied. "Have what matters. Rebuild slower, differently, but don't give up on the only person who makes you better." Sarah's words pierced through the fog of alcohol and self-pity. Michael remembered Emily's face when he read her poetry, her laugh when he burned the first pie, her tears of joy when she saw the books for her students. "God," he whispered, "I'm an idiot." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "Now go home to your fiancé and apologize properly." He arrived at Emily's apartment near midnight. She opened the door at the first knock, her eyes red from crying, but her face showing relief at seeing him. "I thought you decided it was a mistake," she said, her voice small. "No," Michael entered, taking her face in his hands. "You're the only right thing in my life. I was the one who almost made the mistake." He told her everything. Rebecca, the humiliation, the doubts. He expected her to tell him everything would be okay, some comforting platitude. Instead, she surprised him. "Michael," she said seriously, "you need to understand something. I never asked you to become someone you're not. If you need to be tougher in business to survive, do it. But don't confuse being effective with losing your humanity." "How do I tell the difference?" "Did you ever unnecessarily hurt someone in a deal?" she asked. Michael thought. "No, I was always tough but fair." "Did you ever lie or cheat?" "No, my contracts were complex but always honest." "Then there's your answer," Emily said. "You can be competitive without being cruel. You can be ambitious without being immoral. The problem wasn't how you did business before, Michael. It was that there was nothing else in your life besides that." She took his hands. "I don't need you to be a saint. I just need you to remember there's more to life than winning. And if Rebecca or others can't accept that, screw them." Michael laughed despite himself. It was the first time he'd heard Emily curse. "Wow, Miss Parker," he joked. "That language." She smiled. "I'm engaged to a businessman. I need to update my vocabulary." They embraced in silence for a long time. And in that embrace, Michael found his balance. He didn't have to choose between being effective and being good. He could be both. He just had to remember what the ultimate purpose was. Because integrity isn't never making compromises. It's knowing which lines never to cross while navigating a complicated world, and having someone who reminds you of those lines when the fog of ambition obscures them. The following months brought a gradual but profound transformation. Michael rebuilt his company from scratch, not to return to what it was, but to become something new. He hired people not just for their technical skills, but for their alignment with a new mission, technology with social purpose. Emily brought her students to the office for educational tours. Michael's engineers taught basic coding to 10-year-olds. Some parents, inspired, began taking their own evening tech courses. Growth was slow but sustainable. Michael no longer measured success in valuation, but in impact, and he discovered something surprising. This way of doing business, though less lucrative, was also more satisfying. One day, a minor investor who had rejected his presentation during Rebecca's humiliation called again. "Mr. Harrison," he said, "I've been watching what you've been doing. My son participates in coding workshops at your company. He says it changed his life. I want to be part of this." The investment wasn't huge, but it was aligned with his new values, and like a signal, other similar investors began to appear. People tired of the meaningless pursuit of maximum profits, seeking to invest in something that mattered. Meanwhile, Michael and Emily's relationship deepened in everyday and extraordinary ways. He learned to cook more than just apple pie. She learned to basically navigate his financial spreadsheets to help with household finances. He taught financial literacy at community centers. She corrected him when he used too much jargon. But the real growth came in quiet moments. One night, Michael woke from a nightmare, sweating and shaking. He dreamed he was losing everything again, but this time he also lost Emily. She woke up holding him without asking questions, simply being there until his breathing calmed. "What do you need?" she whispered in the darkness. "You," he replied. "I just need to know this is real." "It's real," she promised. "As real as my next electricity bill, and as real as your next stressful meeting. Real doesn't mean perfect, Michael. It means we choose to stay even when it's hard." Another afternoon, Emily came home crying after losing a student. The boy's family had moved to another state, and she hadn't been able to say goodbye properly. Michael, who normally would have tried to fix the problem with logical solutions, simply held her. "It hurts because it mattered," he said, using her own words back. "And it's okay that it hurts." "When did you get so wise?" she asked, smiling through tears. "I have a great teacher," he replied. The wedding was planned for spring. It wouldn't be at a luxury hotel or with hundreds of guests. It would be in the small town in upstate New York where Emily's mother had grown up, at a simple church that had been there for 200 years. Catherine, to everyone's surprise, offered to help, not trying to turn the event into a big social affair, but respecting Emily's vision. The two women, so different, began to develop something like mutual respect. One afternoon, while drinking coffee and planning details, Catherine said something that surprised Emily. "My husband, Michael's father, died when he was 12. Catherine shared, her voice unusually soft. He worked himself to death, literally. Heart attack at his desk at 45. And for years I was so afraid Michael would follow the same path. She looked at Emily with moist eyes. When I saw him working 18 hours a day, ignoring his health, with no life outside work, I saw his father. I thought I'd lose him too. And I didn't know what to do except push him to find someone from our class who could give grandchildren and continue the legacy. But you, Catherine continued, gave him something no amount of money or connections could, a reason to live in balance. That's why I'm grateful. You gave me my son back. Emily took the older woman's hand. He was always your son, Catherine. I just reminded him how to breathe. A month before the wedding, Michael had a final meeting with Rebecca. She had requested to see him, and he, with Emily's approval, accepted. They met at a neutral cafe, not a place of power for either of them. I came to apologize, Rebecca said without preamble. What I did was cruel and unnecessary. Michael nodded, waiting for her to continue. The truth is, she looked at her coffee instead of him. I was jealous, not of her specifically, but of what she gave you, the freedom not to have to be perfect. And I realized we never would have had that. We would have built an empire together, but we would have been alone at the top. Rebecca, Michael said gently, we both deserve to find what we need. For me, it's Emily and everything she represents. For you, I hope you find your own version of that. Are we capable of it? She asked, and for the first time he saw real vulnerability in her expression. People like us, raised to compete and conquer. Are we capable of simply loving? We're human, Michael replied. So yes, we're capable, but we have to choose it. Every day we have to choose vulnerability over control. They parted without animosity, only with the recognition that they had been right for each other in a past life, but that they both needed something different to grow. Because true maturity is recognizing you can be compatible with someone without being right for them. And sometimes letting go with grace is the most loving act of all. 2 weeks before the wedding, when everything finally seemed at peace, the final crisis hit. Emily's mother, Margaret, was hospitalized with a heart attack. It wasn't severe but required surgery, and the family didn't have adequate health insurance. The costs would be devastating for them. Michael, of course, immediately offered to pay. Everything. The best surgery, the best follow-up care, everything they needed. But Emily said no. You can't solve all our problems with money, she said, her voice tense with stress but firm in her conviction. Emily, your mother needs help. I have the means. Why can't I use them? Because then we'll never be on equal footing, she exploded, tears of frustration and fear running down her face. You'll always be the savior, and I'll always be the rescued. And I can't live like that, Michael. I can't marry you feeling like I owe you everything. Michael was stunned. That's not how I feel, Emily interrupted. Every time there's a problem, your solution is money. The library, this problem with my mother, you're probably already thinking about buying a house for us. When do I get to contribute? When is my effort what makes the difference? Your effort makes a difference every day, Michael protested. Really? She challenged him. Or am I just your charity project now? The poor teacher you saved from her difficult life? The words cut deeper than anything Rebecca had said. Michael physically recoiled. Is that what you think? He asked, his voice breaking. After everything, you think this is charity? Emily covered her face with her hands. I don't know anything right now. I just know my mother is in the hospital, and I feel so helpless, and you can fix everything with a check, and I hate feeling this way. I hate needing your money. I hate that without you, my family suffers. Michael sat down, the weight of her words crushing him. She was right about something. He had been trying to solve everything with money because it was his only real tool. Even after everything he'd learned, he still defaulted to the old method. What do you want me to do? He finally asked. Because this isn't about my ego, Emily, it's about your mother. Are we going to let her suffer because you're trying to prove a point? It's not a point, she shouted. It's our future relationship. If we're going to marry, I need to know I'm more than someone you're constantly rescuing. Michael stood up, walked to the window, looking at the New York night. There was a right answer here, he knew. But finding it required him to let go of his need for control in a way he never had. Okay, he finally said, turning to her. I won't pay for your mother's surgery. Emily blinked, surprised. What? But I'll do this. I'll loan the money. To your family, not to you. An official loan with reasonable terms they can afford to repay over the next few years. And you decide if they accept. Michael, let me finish, he interrupted gently. I'm also going to create a medical emergency fund at the company where employees and their families can borrow interest-free for medical crises. Not for you, but because it's the right thing. Your family can be the first to use it if you accept the terms. Emily looked at him, her expression softening. A loan? A loan, he confirmed. Because you're right. I can't solve everything with money, but I can offer help in a way that respects your dignity. And if you say no if your family decides to handle it another way, I'll respect that too. Tears were now rolling down Emily's cheeks, but they were different. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said you were charity. I know it's not like that. I'm scared and tired and you love your mother and want to save her but also maintain your independence, Michael finished. I understand. We're learning to do this together, Emily. To combine our lives without losing who we are individually. And that means I'm going to mess up sometimes, but you need to tell me when I do. She nodded, wiping tears. Would you really make the medical fund? Not just because I asked. I should have thought of it months ago, he admitted. My employees have families, have crises. It's the right thing to do, and it took almost losing you to see it. Emily's family accepted the loan after long discussions. Margaret survived the surgery without complications. And something beautiful happened. Emily's older brother, James, who had been cold toward Michael, sought him out afterward. Thank you, James said, firmly shaking Michael's hand. Not for the money, though we appreciate it, but for treating us like people, not like charity. That means something. The week before the wedding, Michael and Emily had a final conversation. Are you sure? He asked. Sure you want to marry someone whose money will always be part of our lives, with all the challenges that brings? Emily looked at him seriously. Are you sure you want to marry someone who will question every decision, who will never let you just solve problems with money, who will demand you grow even when it's uncomfortable? Absolutely, he replied without hesitation. Then yes, she said, smiling. I'm sure. Because this struggle to find our balance is what makes us real. Easy marriages are boring anyway. They laughed, and in that laughter, they found their way back to each other. Not ignoring their differences, but embracing them, understanding that their love wasn't despite their differences, but partly because of them. Because true love isn't the absence of conflict. It's the commitment to resolve conflicts together, to grow through them, to choose each other, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. The wedding day dawned with the kind of golden light that only an upstate New York spring can offer. The small town of Rhinebeck, where Emily's mother had grown up, woke to the sound of bells and the aroma of fresh bread. The Church of the Good Shepherd, with stone walls that had seen centuries of weddings, baptisms, and funerals, was decorated simply with wildflowers picked by the town's children. Michael arrived early, nervous in a way no business presentation had ever made him. He wore a simple but elegant suit, and in his lapel he had a white rose, symbol of eternal love and new beginnings. His best man was Marcus, the shy student who had written about invisible heroes. The boy, now 9, was incredibly serious in his little suit, holding the rings as if they were the world's most valuable treasure. Mr. Michael, Marcus whispered as they waited. Are you nervous? Terrified, Michael admitted honestly, and that honesty seemed to relax the boy. My mom says being nervous means it really matters, Marcus said with wisdom beyond his years. Your mom is very smart, Michael replied, smiling. The church slowly filled, not with Manhattan high society or business magnates, but with real people. Emily's students and their families, neighbors from the Bronx, some loyal employees of Michael's, Sarah and her family, and even some parents of children who had attended the tech workshops. Catherine arrived with discreet elegance, sitting in the front row. To Michael's surprise, his Uncle Robert also came from Maine, his late grandfather's younger brother, the only other family member who had understood what Michael was doing. Your grandfather would be proud, the elderly man said, squeezing his shoulder with gnarled hands. Not of the businessman you were, but of the man you've become. Then the music began. It wasn't a grand wedding march, but a traditional American melody played on violin by a local musician, soft and full of nostalgia. And Emily appeared. Time seemed to stop. She wasn't wearing a designer dress or elaborate jewelry. Her dress was simple, white lace made by a local seamstress, with embroidered wildflowers on the hem. Her hair fell in natural waves over her shoulders, crowned with a simple wreath of wildflowers. She wore no heavy makeup, just a touch of color on her lips and cheeks flushed with emotion. But she was the most beautiful woman Michael had ever seen. She walked arm in arm with her brother James, who had raised her almost as much as their mother after their father left. Tears already streamed down Emily's cheeks, sparkling like diamonds in the light coming through the stained glass windows. When she reached the altar and James placed her hand in Michael's, the older brother whispered, "Take care of her, or you'll answer to an entire family." "I promise," Michael replied, his voice broken with emotion. The pastor, Father Thomas, had known Emily since she was a child. He had been the one who helped her get her first library card, who encouraged her love of words. "Dear brothers and sisters," he began, his voice resonating in the old stone walls, "we are here to witness the union not just of two people, but of two worlds. Michael and Emily come from very different places, have walked very different paths, but they found something that transcends all those differences, true love based not on what they have but on who they are." The readings were meaningful. A passage from Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken, about choices and love, read by Emily's mother in a trembling but proud voice. A passage from The Little Prince by Saint-Exupéry, about taming and being responsible for what you love, read by Catherine with contained emotion that surprised everyone present. But it was during the vows that the true power of the ceremony was revealed. Michael went first. He held Emily's hands, looking directly into her eyes, and spoke from the heart without prepared notes. "Emily," he began, his voice slightly trembling, "a year ago I was a man who had everything and had nothing. I had built an empire on empty foundations, surrounded by things but completely alone. And then you walked into my life with your borrowed dress and cheap shoes and a heart so rich it made me feel destitute." A gentle laugh rippled through the church. "You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness but the greatest courage. You taught me that giving without expecting anything in return is true power. You taught me to read, not just with my eyes but with my heart. You taught me that the best things in life aren't bought, they're built, moment by moment, choice by choice." Tears now flowed freely, not just from Emily but from many in the congregation. "I promise to continue learning from you every day. I promise not to try to solve all your problems with money, but to be present in your struggles. I promise to read you poetry when you're sad, cook apple pie when you're tired, even if I always burn it a little. I promise to build with you a life that has meaning, not just success. And I promise every day to choose to be the man I see reflected in your eyes." Emily was openly crying now, but smiling at the same time. She took a deep breath before speaking. "Michael," she said, her voice clear despite the tears, "when I met you, I thought you were just another rich man playing at charity. And maybe at first you were. But I saw something in you that you didn't see yourself. A heart buried under years of armor, waiting for permission to truly beat." She wiped tears, but they kept falling. "You scared me because I saw the power you had. The power to change my world with a snap of your fingers. But you taught me that true power isn't what you can do for someone, but what you allow yourself to be with someone. Vulnerable, honest, imperfect, completely human." Her voice broke, but she continued. "I promise to challenge you when you use money as a shield. I promise to remind you, when you get lost in numbers and strategies, that there are people behind every decision. I promise to read to you when you're too stressed to sleep, cook for you when you forget to eat, and love you on your bad days as much as the good ones. And I promise every day to show you that the man you are without your empire is more than enough for me." Father Thomas, with tears in his own eyes, guided them through the exchange of rings. Michael's ring for Emily was his grandfather's simple band. Emily's ring for Michael was one she had bought with her own salary, modest but chosen with love. "By the power vested in me," Father Thomas said, his voice full of joy, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Michael, you may kiss your bride." And he did. It was a soft kiss, reverent, full of promise. Not the passionate kiss of movies, but something deeper. The kiss of two people who had seen each other at their worst moments and chosen to stay. The kiss of two people who knew the road ahead would be difficult, but that they would walk it together. The church erupted in applause and shouts of joy. Emily's students screamed with excitement. Catherine smiled with tears in her eyes. Sarah sobbed openly. As they walked down the aisle as husband and wife, the church bells began to ring. The sound spread over the small town, announcing not just a wedding, but a victory. The victory of love over fear, of connection over isolation, of humanity over empty ambition. Outside, under the spring sun, they were greeted with rose petals thrown by children. Michael lifted Emily in his arms, spinning her as she laughed with pure joy. "Mrs. Harrison," he said, his face glowing with happiness. "Mrs. Parker Harrison," she corrected, smiling. "I'm not losing my name. I've carried it with pride this far." "Mrs. Parker Harrison," he repeated, kissing her again. "Perfect, like you." The celebration that followed was exactly what they both wanted. Simple, joyful, full of real love. There was no luxurious ballroom, but a community space decorated with string lights and colorful tablecloths. There was no five-star catering, but homemade food prepared by town families. Roasted chicken, potato salad, coleslaw, and dozens of traditional desserts. There was no professional DJ, but a group of local musicians playing American folk music. And when they played a square dance, everyone joined. Students and business people, teachers and executives, rich and poor, all together in a celebration of community. Michael, who had never square danced in his life, stumbled over the steps. Emily laughed, patiently guiding him. And in that moment, seeing his new wife laugh as she tried to teach him a dance she'd known since childhood, Michael had a revelation. This was the life he had been searching for. Not a life free of challenges or imperfections, but a life full of love, laughter, community, and purpose. A life where stumbling was part of learning, where being imperfect was part of being human. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, Michael and Emily sat together on a secluded bench, watching their guests dance and celebrate. "Happy?" Michael asked, taking her hand. "More than I thought possible," Emily replied, leaning on his shoulder. "And you?" "Complete," he said simply. "For the first time in my life, I feel complete." They remained in silence for a moment, simply absorbing the moment. Then Emily spoke, her voice soft but serious. "You know this won't be easy, right? We're going to argue about money, about decisions, about how to raise our future children. We're going to frustrate each other." "I know," Michael replied, "and I'm not afraid. Because now I know that love isn't the absence of problems, it's the willingness to face them together." "When did you get so wise?" she asked, repeating her question from months ago. "I have a great teacher," he replied, using his usual response, and they both smiled at their shared ritual. As the celebration continued around them, as stars began to appear in the upstate New York sky, Michael and Emily kissed again. Not because cameras were watching or because it was expected, but simply because they wanted to. And in that kiss, they sealed not just their vows of the day, but their commitment to the journey ahead. A journey of continuous growth, mutual challenge, and love that would grow deeper with each year, each obstacle overcome, each moment of shared vulnerability. Because the true happy ending isn't they lived happily ever after without problems, but they chose to love each other through all the problems. And that love, consciously chosen every day, is the most powerful of all. The full moon rose over Rhinebeck, bathing the small town in silver light. And under that moon, two people from completely different worlds danced as one, their shadows intertwined, their hearts finally at peace. 5 years later, on a Saturday morning in New York, Michael woke to the sound of children's laughter coming from the kitchen of their apartment. They no longer lived in the Tribeca penthouse. They had sold that cold, minimalist space and bought a cozier apartment in Brooklyn, a neighborhood with soul, close to Emily's school. He stretched lazily, noticing the empty space beside him where Emily normally would be. The smell of pancakes and coffee led him toward the kitchen, where he found a scene that filled his heart to the brim. Emily, now 28 and 5 months pregnant with their second child, sat at the table with Sophie, their 3-year-old daughter. The girl, with her mother's dark curls and her father's grey eyes, was reading seriously from a storybook, turning pages with the intense concentration only small children can muster. "And then the dragon said," Sophie improvised, looking at the illustrations. "He said he was sad because nobody wanted to be his friend." "And what happened next?" Emily asked, her hand resting on her rounded belly. Then the brave girl gave him a hug, Sophie said with the simple wisdom of a child, and the dragon was happy. Michael leaned against the doorframe, watching them, his heart so full it ached in the best possible way. "Good morning, my loves," he said, entering the kitchen. "Daddy!" Sophie jumped from her chair and ran to him. Michael lifted her, spinning her in the air as she squealed with delight. "Careful," Emily warned, smiling. "She just had breakfast." "I'll live dangerously," Michael joked, kissing his daughter's curly head before setting her back down. He approached Emily, softly kissing her lips before kneeling to kiss her belly too. "Good morning to you too, little one." "He or she is very active this morning," Emily said, taking his hand and placing it where the baby kicked. Michael felt the movement under his palm and smiled with wonder that never diminished. "Probably a soccer player," he joked. "Or a dancer," Emily countered. As they ate breakfast together, Sophie chattering endlessly about everything and nothing, Michael reflected on the 5 years that had passed. Michael's company had grown again, but differently. He no longer chased explosive growth or exorbitant valuations. Instead, he had focused on creating technology with real social impact, accessible educational apps, platforms connecting non-profits with volunteers, tools helping small businesses digitize. He wasn't the tech industry titan again, but he was respected in a different, deeper way. Other young entrepreneurs sought him out, not for advice on how to get rich quick, but on how to build businesses with meaning. Emily had continued teaching, though she now also coordinated the literacy program they had created together. Every year, hundreds of families benefited from their workshops and resources. She had written a book about teaching literature in underserved communities that had become required reading in teacher training programs across America. Their relationship had its difficult moments, of course. The first year of marriage had been especially challenging, as they learned to fully combine their very different lives. They had had epic arguments about money, about boundaries with respective families, about how they wanted to raise their children, but they had learned to fight constructively, to never go to bed angry, to apologize sincerely when they were wrong. They had gone to couples therapy during the second year, without shame, recognizing that even the strongest love needs maintenance. Sophie's pregnancy had been unplanned but deeply welcomed. Michael had been terrified of being a father, afraid of repeating his own family's mistakes. But Emily had guided him patiently, and when he held Sophie for the first time, he knew he would do anything for that small life. Catherine had turned out to be a surprisingly loving grandmother, softened by age and the genuine love she saw between her son and daughter-in-law. She visited regularly, bringing sensible gifts and offering help with Sophie care in practical ways. Emily's family had fully integrated into their lives. Sunday dinners at Margaret's modest apartment were sacred tradition, with the entire extended family squeezed around folding tables, eating and laughing and loudly discussing baseball and politics. "Daddy," Sophie said, pulling him from his thoughts, "are we going to the park today?" "Of course," Michael replied. "Want to bring your new kite?" "Yes," Sophie clapped with enthusiasm. Later that morning at Prospect Park, Michael ran with Sophie as she tried to keep her kite in the air. Emily watched them from a park bench, one hand on her belly, smiling tenderly. A middle-aged man approached her, clearly recognizing her face from her book cover. "Miss Parker Harrison?" he asked shyly. "Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to thank you. I'm a teacher in Queens, and your book completely changed how I teach. For the first time, I'm really reaching my students." Emily smiled warmly. "That's wonderful. But I didn't change anything." "You did the work." Still, the man insisted, "Thank you." When he left, Michael returned with Sophie, both breathless and laughing. He sat beside Emily, Sophie climbing onto his lap. "Another fan?" Michael asked, having seen the exchange. "A grateful teacher," Emily corrected. "You know what day it is today?" Michael asked, taking her hand. Emily thought for a moment, then her face lit up. 5 years since the gala, since we met. 5 years, Michael repeated, marveling. "Feels like yesterday and a lifetime at the same time." "Any regrets?" Emily asked, though her tone was playful. She knew the answer. "Not one," Michael replied, kissing her knuckles. "Well, maybe one, that I didn't find you sooner." "No," Emily shook her head. "We met exactly when we were supposed to. You needed to be ready to change. I needed to be ready to trust." Sophie, bored with adult conversation, climbed down from Michael's lap and ran after a butterfly. Michael and Emily watched her, their beautiful, perfect, normal daughter living her beautiful, perfect, normal life. "Remember," Michael said softly, "when you asked me who I was, without the company, without the money, without the title?" "I remember," Emily replied. "Now I have the answer," he said, looking into her eyes. "I'm the husband of an extraordinary woman. I'm the father of an amazing girl, and soon another child. I'm a man who's learning every day to be better. That's who I am, and it's more than enough." Emily felt tears sting her eyes as they still did so often with this man who had grown so much. It always was enough, love. You just needed to see it. That evening, after putting Sophie to bed and reading her favorite story for the third time, Michael and Emily sat on their small balcony, watching the lights of Brooklyn twinkle in the distance. The apartment behind them wasn't luxurious. The furniture was a mix of practical pieces and some antiques inherited from both families. The walls were covered with Sophie's drawings, family photos, and yes, bookshelves, now filled with well-read volumes, with dog-eared pages and notes in the margins. "You know what I was thinking at the gala 5 years ago?" Michael asked, pulling Emily closer. "What? I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, and I was right. But I had no idea how much more beautiful you'd become with each year, with each challenge we faced together, with each moment of shared vulnerability." "Romantic tonight, huh?" Emily teased, though her voice was thick with emotion. "Romantic all my life," Michael corrected. "Romantic all my life with you." They remained in silence for a moment, simply embracing under the New York stars. Then Emily spoke, her voice reflective. "There's something I never told you," she began. "That night at the gala, when I first saw you walking across the ballroom toward me, I was terrified. Not just nervous, but genuinely scared, because I saw in your eyes something I recognized. Deep loneliness, disguised as confidence. And I knew, even then, that if I let you in, you would change my life forever." "Do you regret letting me in?" Michael asked, though his heart already knew the answer. "Never," Emily replied firmly. "Because yes, you changed my life. But I changed yours too. And together we became better versions of ourselves." "You know what's craziest?" Michael said. "I thought I was saving you. From poverty, from struggle, from limitation. But it turned out you were the one saving me. From myself." "I didn't save you," Emily corrected gently. "I helped you save yourself. There's a difference." Michael nodded, understanding. She was right, as she almost always was. The work of transformation had been his. But she had given him the map, the compass, and most importantly, the reason to make the journey. The baby kicked hard, and Emily took Michael's hand, placing it on her belly. "Our child will grow up in a home full of love," she said, "with a father who knows vulnerability is strength, and a mother who learned that accepting help isn't weakness, and with an older sister who already knows dragons just need hugs," Michael added, smiling. They laughed together, their laughter mixing with the sounds of the Brooklyn night, distant music from a nearby bar, the murmur of traffic, the whisper of wind through the neighborhood trees. "Michael," Emily said after a moment, "remember what you whispered to me that first night at the gala?" Right before the song ended, Michael thought, trying to remember. He had been so overwhelmed by emotions, so lost in the moment. "No," he admitted. "What did I say?" "You said, 'I don't want this to end,'" Emily reminded him, "and I thought you were talking about the dance. But now I realize you were talking about something bigger, about the awakening, about really feeling for the first time. And you told me, 'Please don't stop,'" Michael remembered, the memory returning with crystal clarity. "You weren't just asking me to keep dancing. You were asking me to keep feeling it, living, being human." "And you haven't stopped," Emily said, smiling. "Every day you choose to keep growing, keep feeling, keep being vulnerable. That's what I love most about you." "That," Michael replied, "is what you gave me permission to do." They kissed softly and deeply, a kiss containing 5 years of shared history, joys and struggles, growth and commitment. A kiss that promised another 5 years, and another 5 after that, until time no longer mattered, until their individual stories had intertwined so completely they were inseparable. When they separated, Michael said something he had been thinking about for days. "I've been considering something," he began. "There's an opportunity to expand the business significantly. Silicon Valley investors, exponential growth, everything I once desperately pursued. He felt Emily tense slightly in his arms. And I'm going to decline, Michael said simply, because it would require constant travel, 18-hour workdays, everything I swore I'd never do again. And I've learned something. Success that costs you your soul isn't success at all. Emily relaxed, kissing his cheek. Are you sure? I don't want you thinking in 10 years that I held you back. You didn't hold me back from anything, Michael assured. You showed me what really matters. And what matters is here, on this balcony, in that apartment with our daughters sleeping and our baby growing, at Sunday dinners with your family and visits from my mother. That's what matters. You know what? Emily said, her voice full of emotion. I think you finally get it. Really get it. I do, Michael confirmed. It took almost losing everything to find the one thing I really needed, but it was worth every moment of pain, every moment of doubt, because it brought me here, to you, to this. The church clock nearby struck 10 in the evening. Inside the apartment, they heard Sophie stir in her bed, probably dreaming of friendly dragons and hugs. We should go in, Emily said. Tomorrow we have lunch with your mother and Sophie will wake up at dawn. 5 more minutes, Michael requested, holding her closer. Just 5 more minutes here, in this perfect moment. Emily nestled against him, her head resting on his shoulder, her hand intertwined with his. Okay, 5 more minutes. But they stayed there much longer, under the stars that had seen so many loves throughout the centuries, under the New York sky that had witnessed so many transformations. They stayed there, 2 people who had traveled from opposite worlds to meet in the middle, to build something new together. And as the city slept around them, as their daughter dreamed of friendly dragons and their unborn child floated in safe waters, Michael and Emily simply existed together, in love and in peace. Because in the end, life isn't measured in achievements or accumulated wealth. It's measured in moments like this, in hands intertwined under the stars, in laughter shared over simple dinners, in the daily choice to love even when it's hard. It's measured in the courage to be vulnerable, in the strength to ask for help, in the wisdom to know that being enough doesn't mean being perfect. True surrender isn't defeat. It's the bravest act of all, lowering the weapons that never really protected us and allowing ourselves to be seen, to be known, to be loved, exactly as we are. And so, a man who once had everything and nothing finally had everything that mattered. Not because he had conquered or bought it, but because he had chosen it. He had chosen love over fear, connection over isolation, humanity over empty ambition. He had chosen every day to surrender to something greater than himself. And in that surrender, he had found the only victory that truly mattered, a life filled not with achievements but with love, not with distant admirers, but with deep connections, not with countless possessions, but with precious moments. The armored heart had finally surrendered, and in its surrender it had found freedom.